if you had to summarize just in one quick verse or quick quote, we have something up here, but what would it be? What would you hope that readers would come away with? And I want to tip my own hand about your answer in this direction, and that is one of the real strengths as the editor who acquired your book and read it, and engaged with you, is that people often come to the text and they say, well, look, there's all these different denominations. There's all of these different voices across, almost 2,000 years now of Christian history who have read the text in different ways. And it's sort of a cacophony of voices of different people saying different things. And so people say, look, well, how are we supposed to find meaning? And they'll do it strictly from the history of reception or the way people have read the Bible through the centuries. But one of the real strengths of what I think that you have done is that you've gone into the text and you've shown that the complexities and the difficulties of interpreting the Bible, whether it's Paul and the congregations he's writing to, and then Paul himself trying to negotiate his own meaning, and Paul himself having to clarify and sort out what he's doing, or Jesus himself engaging with the scriptures, engaging with the traditions of his day, and negotiating and creating its own kind of meaning. And so to me, that's one of the real brilliant strokes of your book, is that you've brought that to the forefront, that it's not just that everyone after the Bible was written looks back and is confused and arguing about the text, but what you actually say is, no, listen, the characters inside the pages themselves are doing this. And so I'll get back to my original question, but and maybe I'll lead you and say, how might that inform the way we read?
Yeah, thanks, Trevor. I mean, that's a very generous and lovely summary of what I was trying to do in this book. I wanted to pare back those 2,000 years of tradition and the doctrines and the claims we've made about the Bible, and say, what is it when we just enter its world and read it on its own terms for what it is. And we find so much, what I use the words, it's like a dynamic living tradition. So we find in the Bible, whether it's Jesus or Paul, or even in the Old Testament, the later prophets are rewriting the Torah. There's this constant mode of interpreting and of updating for new contexts. So within the Bible itself, we get a kind of model of, we should always be engaging this in a kind of dynamic and flexible way so that it continues to speak to our new contexts.
Right.
So, the challenge for the contemporary church, I think, is we want to say, well, this is what the Bible meant. It's also a temptation of scholars who like the historical side. This is what the Bible meant in the first century, so this is the best form of truth. But actually, the Bible itself challenges that and says, hang on, we've given you lots of ways of showing that we need to constantly be grappling with this material to think about, what does that mean in this world, in my context, whether that's in Australia or America or Africa or anywhere else.
Right. And yeah, it's just, you raised that point so well, in so many different places with, I think of the famous place where, going back to the bumper sticker ethics kind of thing, the idea that the Bible says it, that settles it. Well, Paul wrote something in a letter to the Corinthians about associating with certain types of people, and then they clearly understood that in one way. Then he had to go back and say, I didn't actually mean that exactly like I wrote it. And in some ways, it's a healthy dose of humility, and that's I have not done a word search of the entire book to look for the words humble or humility, but what I see in you, both as a scholar and what I see in this book, is really a call for intellectual honesty and a call for humility and listening to others and recognizing, drawing on the words you just used, the Bible and rewrite, that the final word might not be the final word. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, that's totally fair. and I mean, we know because we have 2,000 years of tradition. Christians have, you know, I named apartheid. We look back. It only takes a generation or two to look back and go, oh my goodness, how could Christians have used the Bible in that way? So for me, that's always a dose of humility, that we could be those people for the next generation, you know. So humility and curiosity are two of the words I think I use quite a lot. Like, be curious about possible meanings, be curious about your own location, what you bring to the text, what you're assuming, what you want to find versus what you might find, and have a sense of humility that none of us, you know, the Bible is using all sorts of language and symbol and metaphor to talk about God, to express something inexpressible in some ways, you know. It's a human endeavor, and none of that's perfect, and we need to practice humility when we come to it, and openness is part of that, I think, too.
Well, as we wrap up our conversation, I want to communicate to the listeners that the topic of in even the devil quotes scriptures, reading the Bible on its own terms, is a very complicated topic. But the book that you have written, Robyn, is remarkably accessible. And so those who are listening or hearing this interview or have heard about the book, it really is a book, to be frank, that, you know, my 70-plus-year-old mother, you know, who's been to church her entire life, I would gladly give this book to her and make it be understood, or hope it's understood. Before I say some parting words, I'm sorry, go ahead, Robyn. What were you going to say?
No, I was going to say my one of the people I made read a couple of chapters was my mother, who's sat in church her whole life but has no theological education. And I tasked her with, Mum, if I've lost you, if it's boring or too technical and you don't know what I'm talking about, mark it on the page. That's the feedback I want. So I did, and I should also say to people listening, I'm about to put up on a website a little free PDF for people who've bought the book, so that people who want to use it in like congregational or community book studies, I'll have some like little study guide questions for people.
Oh, fantastic.
Because it is designed for, like you said, anyone to be able to pick up and read. You do not need a theology degree. I wanted to bring all that scholarship in ways that was accessible for people.
Well, for listeners, let me thank you for your time and thank Robyn for a wonderful book. On behalf of the press, please buy the book. It will be available as a physical book that you can hold, as Robyn and I have been holding the book up. It will also be available in Kindle, and I'm also excited to say that shortly around the time of release, you will be able to hear Robyn herself narrate the audio version. So if you enjoy an Aussie accent, polished Aussie accent as Robyn possesses, then you'll enjoy that.